Picture this. You're sound asleep in your own home when suddenly FBI agents burst through your front door, toss in a flashbang grenade, pull you out in handcuffs, and point guns at your wife. The worst part? They raided the wrong house. Now here's what makes it even more frustrating. When you try to sue the government for this terrifying mistake, they tell you that you don't have the right to hold them accountable. This isn't some made-up scenario. This actually happened to a real family, and their fight for justice went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court just delivered a 9-0 unanimous decision that's going to have serious consequences, not just for this one family, but for anyone who's worried about government overreach, especially gun owners who care about protecting their rights and holding authorities responsible when they mess up. Before we get into the details, I need you to do something really quick. Smash that like button right now if you care about protecting your Second Amendment rights. It only takes a second, and it makes a huge difference in getting this information out to more people who need it. Also, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any future updates on your rights. Trust me, you're going to want to stay informed about this stuff. So, what exactly happened in this groundbreaking case, and what does it mean moving forward? We're going to break down everything you need to know about this important Supreme Court decision and where things stand right now. This case is called Martin versus the United States, and it all started back in 2017 in a suburb outside Atlanta. The FBI planned and carried out an early morning raid, but they made a massive error. They showed up at the completely wrong address and raided the wrong family's home. The family who lived in that house decided to take legal action against the federal government. They filed their lawsuit under something called the Federal Tort Claims Act, which people usually just call the FTCA. The big question that needed to be answered was this: does the federal government get to just walk away without facing any consequences? Or can regular people actually sue them and make them answer for their actions the same way any private citizen would have to if they did something similar? Now, while this case doesn't directly involve the Second Amendment or gun rights in a technical sense, it's still incredibly important for every gun owner to understand. Why? Because this case is all about holding the government accountable, about what happens when raids go wrong, and whether federal agents can be forced to take responsibility when they go too far or make careless, dangerous mistakes. The Supreme Court's 9-0 decision overturned what the lower courts had previously ruled, and they sent the whole case back down for the lower court to look at it again with fresh eyes. The Department of Justice managed to delay things temporarily, but the case is still moving in the right direction, and the Supreme Court made the right call. Let me explain what actually took place. An FBI special agent named Lawrence Guerrera was put in charge of leading this pre-dawn raid on a house where they believed gang members were staying. They had a specific target address that they were supposed to go to, but instead of just going to that address directly, this FBI agent decided to use his own personal GPS system. From what we know, he entered the address into his phone, and his phone's GPS took him to a completely different location. The GPS directed him to the home where the plaintiffs in this case lived. That's where Katrina Martin resided with her boyfriend and her 7-year-old son. When the FBI team arrived at the house, they didn't give any warning at all. They just smashed through the front door without hesitation. They threw flashbang grenades inside the home. They found Katrina Martin's boyfriend, who was apparently so scared by what was happening that he had hidden himself in a closet. The agents dragged him out of the closet, pulled Katrina Martin out as well, put handcuffs on him, and held Katrina Martin at gunpoint. They also removed their 7-year-old son from the home during all of this chaos. After everyone was detained, the FBI agents began searching through the house. While they were looking around, they noticed some mail sitting on a coffee table. One of the agents picked up the mail and looked at it, and that's when they realized the mail showed a completely different address. At that moment, they had this terrible realization that they had made a huge mistake. They were in the wrong house. Following this nightmare experience, the family decided to sue the FBI for conducting this wrongful raid. They brought their legal claim under the Federal Tort Claims Act, the FTCA, which is a law that gives ordinary citizens the ability to sue the federal government for certain types of wrongful actions committed by federal employees while those employees are doing their jobs. Under normal circumstances, the federal government would be protected from these kinds of lawsuits, and these officers would be shielded by things like qualified immunity. But the FCA creates specific situations where the government has actually made exceptions that allow people to bring these kinds of claims in court. However, the FCA also includes a long list of exceptions where you're not allowed to file these lawsuits. The FBI brought up 2 of these exceptions in their defense. The first one is called the intentional tort exception. Generally speaking, under the FCA, you can't sue the government for intentional wrongdoing when things like assault, battery, false arrest, or malicious prosecution are connected to government actions. But right after that exception, there are some carve-outs and exceptions, and one of them is called the law enforcement proviso. This proviso basically says that if the wrongdoing was done by a federal law enforcement officer, someone who has the authority to conduct searches, seize evidence, or make arrests, then you might still be able to bring those intentional tort claims against them. The second exception the FBI tried to use is called the discretionary function exception. This exception protects the government from being held liable for wrongful acts that result from an official making a discretionary decision. In other words, if an officer makes a discretionary choice while they're doing their job, they might fall under that exception and be protected from lawsuits. In this particular case, the argument was that because this FBI agent used his own discretion when he decided to enter the address into his personal GPS, he should be covered by that discretionary function exception. When the family filed their lawsuit, the federal district court in Georgia reviewed everything. The government and the FBI filed a motion asking the court to dismiss the case based on those exceptions we just talked about. Ultimately, the lower court sided with the FBI. The family then appealed the decision to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. When the 11th Circuit reviewed the case, they also ruled in favor of the FBI and the agents involved. After losing in both lower courts, the family sought review from the Supreme Court. They filed what's called a certiorari petition, and the Supreme Court agreed to hear the case. After reviewing everything, the Supreme Court issued a 9-0 unanimous ruling in favor of the family. They ruled against the FBI. The Supreme Court's unanimous decision was written by Justice Neil Gorsuch. In their ruling, they vacated what the 11th Circuit had said and sent the case back down to the 11th Circuit for them to reconsider it. The Supreme Court's main holding was that the law enforcement proviso only modifies the intentional tort exception. It doesn't override all the other exceptions that are mentioned in the FCA. Now, that might sound like a technical legal point, and it is, but it really matters because the lower courts had been applying this very broad form of immunity. That broad immunity is what the lower court used in this case too. The Supreme Court found that the government doesn't automatically get immunity just because an officer's actions are connected to federal policy or could be described as being consistent with federal law. That's not what the FCA was designed to do. Instead, liability under the FCA is supposed to be judged using state laws. The statute says that the government can be held liable if, under similar circumstances, a private person would be held liable under the law of that particular state. Basically, it's trying to look at what the federal government did and compare it to how a private person would be treated under those state laws. Based on this analysis, the Supreme Court vacated the 11th Circuit's decision and sent it back for further consideration in light of this new 9-0 ruling. Recently, the 11th Circuit ordered the FBI and the federal government to file a supplemental brief explaining how the Supreme Court's new ruling affects this case going forward. However, the Department of Justice was able to get an extension, and now they don't have to file their response until November 21st. That deadline could potentially be pushed back even further because the FBI and the federal government are claiming that the current federal shutdown is preventing their attorneys from working on their behalf to file the brief that the court is requesting. But regardless of these delays, eventually the federal government and the FBI are going to have to respond to this case moving forward in light of what the Supreme Court said. They can only stall for so long while the shutdown is happening. We've already seen some other courts actually force attorneys for the federal government to file their documents despite the shutdown. So we'll have to see how this plays out. Maybe the court in this case will push them to file as well. We've seen some other courts order that filings still need to be submitted despite the shutdown. But as things stand right now, the court has given them until at least November 21st. The implications of this ruling extend far beyond just this one family's terrible experience. For gun owners specifically, this decision is about protecting your rights when government agents come to your door. It's about making sure that when mistakes happen, especially serious mistakes that violate your constitutional rights, there's actually a path to justice. It's about ensuring that federal law enforcement can't just claim immunity whenever they want to avoid facing consequences for their actions. The Supreme Court's unanimous decision sends a clear message that the government doesn't get a free pass just because agents are doing their jobs. There have to be limits, and there has to be accountability when those limits are crossed. The Martin case is now a critical piece of case law that protects citizens' rights to seek justice when the government wrongs them. It clarifies that the Federal Tort Claims Act is meant to provide real recourse for real harms, not just be a paper promise with so many exceptions that it becomes meaningless. The fact that this was a 9-0 decision makes it even more powerful. When all 9 Supreme Court justices, regardless of their different judicial philosophies, agree on something, it sends a strong message about how clear-cut the issue is. As this case continues through the legal system and we get more updates about what happens at the 11th Circuit level, it will be important to watch how the courts apply this new Supreme Court precedent. The federal government will eventually have to file their response and address how the Supreme Court's ruling impacts their position. The family will get another chance to have their day in court and hopefully receive the justice they deserve after what they went through. If you found this information valuable, do me a favor and hit that like button right now. It helps get this critical information in front of more gun owners who need to know about these changes. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an update on your rights. Share this video with every gun owner you know because this information is too important to keep to yourself. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.